Welcome to Dynasty Life. I'm Theo Gremminger. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. And redraft is back, but we're still out here in the Dynasty streets. We're still improving our rosters. We're still reacting and ready to go and trying to win Dynasty championships. And I'm stoked today to be joined by Garret Price of Dynasty Nerds. Garret, you've been on Dynasty Life a bunch of times now, so you're doing a great job. We keep bringing you back in the mix, and really excited to talk a little bit of week one with you. We actually have some stuff to talk about, and it's not just like theoretical. We have actual information. Right. How much context do you put into week one? Are you one of these people that is like, hey, it's sort of an extra preseason for some of these NFL teams because they're so injury cautious? Or are you somebody who says, this is the data dump that we've been waiting for? I want to really react without overreacting.
Do you want the politically correct no. analyst answer, or do you want what the heart feels? Because here's what it true, like, if I'm like pulling behind the shades, what it really is if it's a guy that I liked, that I'm like, guys, it's week one, chill out, not a big deal, don't stress it. If it's a guy that I was not high on, I'm like, I told you, like, this is what we saw. So it's so biased. I hate that I'm that way, but it truly does. Like, and you'll see some of my preconceived notions based on tape or things like that come out in this episode as we react. Now, realistically too, I think there are certain things that are more telling than others. So I don't think all of these things are created equal. I think there are some things about jobs and situations that I think are very telling and very important. I think there are things about performances that are not that important. It was just, man, it was bad luck, or they were schemed out of this or whatever. Like, that doesn't bother me as much. But when it comes to specifically the running back position, when we've been speculating on how the roles are going to shake out, how many touches, the splits, things like that, those are the things that are a little more telling for me in week one than just like the dude only had 4 points. Like, okay, bad luck, it happens. So those are the things that kind of weigh a little bit more for me personally.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think that it really, we don't want to ignore it because it's the first time that NFL teams have actually had to tell us the truth. The preseason is just shrouded in lies. And now we're finally seeing, like, the truth is told by what they do on an NFL field. I mean, we even have all these shrouded, like, injuries. Like, a big shout out to the San Francisco beat reporters. Not one of you could, like, insinuate that CMC wasn't playing on Monday night. Like, give us a little bit of a hint there. But got to start out with this one. My guy Garret is from Ohio, lives in Ohio. You have a Brown shirt on right now, I believe. I can't tell by the full. Okay, so you got an old school Browns logo there. Yeah. Ohio State guy, Marvin Harrison Jr. I have bags and bags of him on my Dynasty rosters. This is a player that we talked about together multiple times as a transcendent player, as a fixture for your Dynasty roster, as a foundational piece for any single Dynasty roster. All the praise we gave him, and then week one was extremely frustrating. Are you at all, like, concerned? Is this something where it could take a couple of weeks? Where are you at on Marvin Harrison Jr.?
My concern level is about as low as it could possibly be. Like, it sucks. Like, you want to see your guys that you like come out there week one and ball out and have 7 catches for 120 yards and a touchdown. Like, that's what you want to see out of Marvin Harrison Jr. week one. But it just doesn't always work out that way. It was a really weird game against Buffalo. Some of their production, they lost a whole series basically with the touchdown return by DJ Dallas, which is awesome. But, like, you lost the whole series when that happens for your offense. The targets were inconsistent. There were times that he was open, he wasn't getting targets. There was times where he slipped. Like there was just, it was a weird game. It was just a weird game. So for me, the panic level is as low as it could be.
You saw a trade go down, and I was kind of shocked by this one.
I did. I saw a trade go down, and it was basically somebody wanted to hit the reset button. They're one of the worst teams. They have Marvin Harrison Jr. on their team, but they are in love with next year's class, and specifically Luther Burden, Tet McMillan. And so they were willing to trade away their Marvin Harrison Jr. share for the first, and it was like a third on top. So something small, but basically it was for that early pick and a chance at one of the top 2 or 3 players, more than likely looking at one of those 2 wide receivers. And so for me, that's just baffling to see something like that happen. But you never know what people are going to do in your fantasy league. So while you wouldn't think there would be a trade window here, it never hurts to throw out an offer because you never know what people are willing to accept.
Dynasty PSA: never sell somebody coming off of an awful game when they're young and the market still values them a lot. It's just bad process. And respect to this upcoming class of wide receivers, it's still a speculation on where these guys are going to land, sort of the potential for target competition. I mean, we're getting into all sort of weeds when we're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. versus pretty much any wide receiver in the 2025 class, even though those guys are both studs. But let's Marvin Harrison Jr. aside, what was sort of your biggest disappointment from week 1?
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest disappointment that I saw, and I guess it wouldn't be as much for me, but I just think the general community, there was a lot of hype from what he did in the preseason looking at Bo Nix. And I think when you look at the game that he had, the biggest concern, at least for me, was, does he have an NFL arm? Like, is he able to push the ball down the field? And in week 1, that looked like a resounding no. You know, he had 42 pass attempts, but couldn't eclipse 140 yards passing. That's absurd. That is absurd through 2 interceptions. He did get the rushing touchdown, which helped, but they're like the hive and the buzz with Sean Payton and the next accurate quarterback, and it's going to be building. And like, it was a turd ferg for sure. So I think for me, there's plenty of guys that you could have put on this list. I mean, we could 10 to 20 guys easily would have fit this one. But I think he was one of the biggest ones for me.
Yeah, and you got a buzzsaw coming into Denver this week with that Pittsburgh Steelers defense, which is full of absolute dudes. That's a really problematic game, and you could see Sean Payton start out 0-2. Bo Nix, the rushing touchdown was nice, and I think that's one thing with his game where there's a little bit of a floor there, even though he right now he's on the field as a bad starting NFL quarterback. There was a couple of really bad ones this weekend. What about a positive surprise for you?
Yeah, I think it had to be probably looking into specifically this rookie class. But I was not super high on Brian Thomas Jr., but I was very pleasantly surprised what I saw week 1 out of him. He looked very fluid. He got open well. He got a great target share in that offense after like some rumblings in camp that it wasn't a very good camp for him and things like that. Like for kind of the negative buzz around him, and I thought his tape was very meh, like he showed out. So I think he was probably the biggest positive surprise for me.
Yeah, I love Brian Thomas Jr., and I think that was everything you wanted to see. You brought up the target share was like 22%. And I also think the way that Christian Kirk, snap-wise, is just not going to be on the field nearly as much. I think Thomas Jr. is a guy that we can really lean on as like a second half guy. You can already put him in your flex because of his ability to score touchdowns and just his ability to get open. So I'm with you. We want to see more targets, probably more catches, 4 catches, 47 yards, but he does find the end zone. So I'm with you on Brian Thomas. What about a rookie sleeper? Is any of these rookie sleepers kind of standing out to you? We had a couple of them flash this past weekend. Guys like Jalen McMillan, Devon Vele. There's some interesting players out there.
Yeah, right now he would have been more of a sleeper a few hours ago than he is right this moment. But Jaylen Wright, I think, is a guy that you look at his fit in this offense, and it's a hand in glove fit for the offense. What they do there, it's a group that we can't necessarily trust to stay healthy, and I think he's a talented player. So if you were to tell me next year that Jaylen Wright is a top 12 back, like, I don't think that's out of the equation for a guy like him and what he could be in this offense, assuming Mostert moves on and whatnot. Now, that's lofty expectations, but he could have an opportunity to shine right now. And for me, like, he's even at the slightly increased price, you probably want to get him because there's a chance that he gets to play this week. And if he does, that window could be slammed shut.
Yeah, and we're recording this before, like this is going to air on YouTube after the Thursday night game. So I'm with you on this one. We might both look like foolish, and this might be like a Jeff Wilson game. But the fact that I think you nailed it, it's like Raheem Mostert, everything's sort of gone well the last 2 seasons in Miami health-wise. But anybody who's been playing this game for a long time, he plays like half the year and multiple seasons in San Francisco. And that's not like, me being like over the top. Like he literally plays half the year in multiple seasons. When he's on the field, very effective, but we're already seeing the injuries out of the box. And once you have an older player struggling with injuries, and Mike McDaniel also sung his praises for his toughness last week, which makes me feel like he's already playing sort of banged up. This is a opportunity for Jaylen Wright. Jeff Wilson, you might get a week this week, but long-term, Jaylen Wright's the guy. And I'm with you. I think it's like Devon Etienne and Jaylen Wright. It's such a strong backfield. We can just have a mental exercise. If Raheem Mostert was 26 years old, where would he be in dynasty rankings based on his season last year? And you're going to have that opportunity with Wright and Etienne at some point. And the way they're using Etienne as a receiver, opening up things for Wright as a runner. I mean, it's incredible. We're going to take a quick break, and we come back. I'm going to get Garrett's reaction from Brock Bowers and a few quarterbacks. We're also going to dive into 8 moves that we think you should be making right now to improve your dynasty rosters.
This episode is brought to you by Player Profiler, the Dynasty Deluxe package. The rankings are the best in the industry. It includes strategy mode where you can say, hey, change the rankings to be win now. Oh, change the rankings to be productive struggle. There's also a draft planner to help to strategize where you should take players because the draft planner also includes ADP. There's a trade finder where we look up on My Fantasy League and we see trades that are done, including a particular player. Then there's a trade analyzer where you can plug in draft picks, players, and we assign a lifetime value to draft picks out 5 years. The best thing about our trade analyzer, it can't be gamed with volume. And there's mock draft data to see right now what's the market for player X versus player Y, including in the fall when very few mock drafts are happening. And our Dynasty Guide, the Dynasty Dominator, would cost you $10 on Amazon, but you get it for free with Dynasty Deluxe, and you get our Rookie Guide for free, a $25 value. So you get all of that for $45. So I mean, it's a great deal.
Welcome back to Dynasty Life. Theo Gremminger with Garret Price of Dynasty Nerds. We're talking about like some negatives, some positives. Let's talk about a positive. Brock Bowers starts out his NFL career sort of what you wanted to see. There wasn't a smash game, but he gets 8 targets right out of the gate, leads the Raiders in targets. It was a close game as well. So this is like a neutral game script. We see this sort of target total. Bowers is awesome. What were your initial reactions for the way they're using him and his week 1 production?
Yeah, when you look at the targets that this guy got week 1 and then had fantastic production on top of it, it's everything you could have hoped. So 8 targets, 6 receptions, 58 yards. And you're right. It's not like one of those games where you're like, I like Isaiah Likely this week, where you're like, oh my gosh, monster numbers. But in a perfect world, like this is almost perfect for dynasty owners that are paying attention, because nobody's going to look at this and say, oh, he got 11.8 points this past week, like I gotta get Brock Bowers. But the underlying numbers there of 6 receptions on 8 targets, like if that continues, he's going to be a smash play each and every week at his age. Like Rich Dotson, my co-host for Dynasty Nerds last night, was talking. He was like, if you wanted to tell me today that you want to take Brock Bowers right now as the number 1 overall dynasty tight end, I'm not going to argue it. Like, yes, there's plenty of other good guys that we could have at the top of that conversation. But I think seeing this right off the rip, especially in a world where typically, obviously last year was an anomaly with Sam Laporta, but typically it takes time for these tight ends to really get into the offense, to get the targets, to get involved. It took him no time at all. So on a team with limited weapons as it is, and Devontae Adams not getting any younger, this could be one of the rare situations where you have the tight end as maybe not even just the 2, but the number 1 option in the offense sooner rather than later.
We also have the bridge where Devontae Adams seems like a no-brainer trade target if the Raiders season does not go well.
Yeah.
And right now, the Raiders are going to be staring at an 0-2. They're playing Baltimore this week. That's sort of a get-right game. Baltimore might put a number on them. So you have this opportunity for second half of the year, Brock Bowers, to make his ascension to potentially being the tight end 1 overall in redraft in 2025, let alone Dynasty. And we had this conversation this summer, and I talked to you and a couple other Dynasty minds that I really respect about how aggressive we should have Brock Bowers in the ranking. And there's nothing I've seen so far that doesn't indicate where I'm right with you guys, where it's kind of pick your favorite one. Laporta was tight end 1 last year, really should probably get the benefit of the doubt, but Trey McBride, young, a stud, had like a 30% target share this past weekend. Brock Bowers is just the truth. And speaking of Laporta, last year had a very strong week 1, 5 targets. Week 2, 6 targets. We're already seeing more target total from Brock Bowers, despite playing next to a guy who's had 3 straight years with like 170 targets. So we love seeing that out the gate. Let's talk about Caleb Williams. We see Rome Odunze is going to miss some time. Dodged a bullet, but he still looks like he's going to miss at least several weeks. Keenan Allen not practicing, might miss this week. Where are we at on this Bears offense? Did we overrate this Bears offense heading into the season? And should we be concerned with Caleb Williams right now? Or is Tennessee's defense just nasty and they're going to give people problems all season long? Or is it a mixture of everything?
Probably at the end of the day, it's probably a little bit of a mixture of everything. The expectations were sky high. And obviously, we wanted more out of Caleb Williams week 1, not even eclipsing 100 yards. You don't see that very often in the NFL, in today's NFL. So it was definitely a disappointing week 1. But all of that being said, the tape is still the tape. He looks like a fantastic player. There are a lot of good assets on this offense. It just might be one of those guys where, man, maybe year 1 isn't incredible, but it springboards him into future years of success. So if I have him in redraft, I'm a little panicked. If I have him in Dynasty, not panicked at all.
Okay, so let's put the panic level to the test. Jayden Daniels or Caleb Williams?
For Dynasty?
Yeah. We had a smash game from Daniels last week. But a lot of these rookie drafts, it was the Caleb Williams going off the board at the 101 and Jayden Daniels going off the board at like the 102 or the 103, depending on how your league valued Marvin Harrison Jr. There is going to be potentially a Daniels manager who might be willing to make this trade. If you're the Caleb Williams manager, knowing that you've seen it with Jayden Daniels, are you going to take it, or are you thinking super long term?
This might almost be contrarian now, which I'm not doing intentionally, but I think I'm holding pat with Caleb Williams for now. I get it. Like, if you decided that you would rather have Jayden Daniels, I don't blame you one bit. From a fantasy perspective, week 1 did everything you would hope. That rushing total, the touchdowns, like, baller, absolute baller. But long term, like, could this develop into another Justin Fields type of situation where when he's there and he's on the field for fantasy, he is going to be one of the top 10 options each and every time. But for an NFL team, how long can he run around, take huge shots, and still be okay? How long can we get mediocre passing performances and still be okay? He doesn't have the greatest supporting cast there right now in Washington, and maybe that'll change. So, like, if you want to take the ceiling, I think Jayden Daniels does have a higher ceiling than Caleb Williams. But if you want to take the floor and security, I'm taking Caleb Williams. And with my high-end assets, I usually play it safer with my high-end assets. So I'll take Caleb Williams.
I think I'm making the switch. I think Jayden Daniels, I think I would do it. And it's probably a very poor process. And I took Caleb Williams ahead of him in like 2 leagues. But if somebody calls me up, hey, if you're in one of my leagues and you want to make the switch, I'll say there was all kinds of problems with the Cliff Kingsbury offense in week 1. It didn't seem to click. Certainly if you were holding out hope for a Terry McLaurin is this year's DJ Moore, you weren't too happy about week 1. Yeah, not a great one there. But at the end of the day, he looks like Lamar Jackson. And Jayden Daniels is such a elusive runner. He's so explosive that he's going to be propped up by that. And at the end of the day, it's like we see injuries happen to so many players where
Sure.
I'm gonna give Daniels the benefit of the doubt that, hey, first of all, we got to get his helmet to stay on. It kept popping off.
That's like 3 times or something like
what's
that.
What's going on with that? Shout out to the Commanders equipment staff. Get a helmet on him. You don't need a head injury for Jayden Daniels, but he just looked fantastic. And this is one where if we podcast again, later in the season, I think we'll revisit this question. But Jayden Daniels certainly looks awesome. How about just quickly, like Bryce Young, how disappointing was, like, we had the Dave Canales effect and everything looks broken in Carolina. And on the flip side, we also saw a pretty disappointing week out of Will Levis, which we thought, in the Callahan offense, he's going to get propped up. Now, it wasn't as bad as Bryce Young, but the terrible year 2 quarterback performances, what's your level of concern for both of these guys?
It's pretty high at the moment, if I'm being honest. I wasn't a huge Bryce Young guy. We were consistently taking him the third of the 3 quarterbacks last year, so we weren't super high on him. That being said, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt going into year 2. He got an improved receiving core, improved offensive line play, but it was bad. I mean, it was really bad week 1. And if you actually go back and look at the numbers for the offensive line, like, the offensive line didn't play that poorly. Don't get me wrong. They weren't world beaters in the best offensive line of all time, but their underlying numbers were actually pretty solid. So that leads me to believe that it's not as much of a line issue as maybe it's just Bryce Young. Maybe he just doesn't have what it takes to be an elite guy at the next level. And so we'll see what happens. But when you have a new head coach, that guy wants to eventually get his guy. This team is probably not winning many games. They do have their first round pick this year, fortunately. If they're picking in the top 5, it would not shock me if they go after their guy at quarterback. So I'm very worried about Bryce Young. And Will Levis, he has less insulation with being a second round guy. The thing that helps him, though, is I think the team is a solid team that might win enough games to keep them out of the top 5. And so maybe he gets to extend his lifespan a little bit because of that. But still, obviously very concerning with all of the additional weapons that were added to his repertoire this season.
Yeah, so the Will Levis concerns me far less than Bryce Young. I actually will be shocked if Carolina doesn't make the switch this offseason. If Dave Canales can't get it right with Bryce Young, then no one can. And he was so poor last year in terms of, like, accuracy, in terms of literally any metric that we want to rank, like, any metric he was shockingly bad with, and does not seem to be able to elevate anyone. Deontay Johnson not doing anything for him. Really the only dynasty positive this week was Xavier Legette gets like a 20+% target share as your rookie wide receiver. And you can get him pretty much any redraft league for like free because no one wants Carolina Panthers, but it's a train wreck. At least Will Levis has some physical tools that we can lean on. He's got a cannon of an arm. He's mobile. And this offense maybe could get better. Tony Pollard certainly looks good. So they have a tilting game this weekend against the Jets. I think Tennessee is going to give them all that they can handle coming off of a short week against San Francisco. But let's talk about another quarterback who looked kind of immobile and a shell of his former self was Kirk Cousins. If you have Kirk Cousins on your dynasty roster, especially in Superflex, you're talking about a guy that's a locked-in starter for you. How aggressive would you be going and acquiring Michael Penix? Because I think I'm there where I feel uncomfortable rostering Kirk Cousins without Penix. I think that this change could happen rapidly. Where are you at on this one?
Yeah, this was a really frustrating one for me on draft night because I like Kirk Cousins. I thought he was a good fit for what they want to do in this offense, but I really loved Michael Penix, and I thought with the right situation that he had all of the physical abilities to be a very, very good quarterback. So to get them both together was really unfortunate. But the hardest part right now is hopefully your league is sleeping a little bit because you were able to get Penix really cheap in rookie drafts, even in super flex leagues, traditionally going somewhere between mid to the end of the second round. So you were taking him with 2.9, 2.10 picks like that. Now you're going to have to pay up a little bit more because we did see Kirk Cousins in week 1 and he did not look great. And could the future be sooner rather than later in this situation? And the Falcons will just eat that money. We've seen teams do that lately. It's not been as much of an obstacle as it's been in the past for teams to just we don't like it. We'll just eat the money and we'll move on to a guy that we think can do it. So I'm with you. I am totally good acquiring Penix now. It just might be a little more expensive than it was, say, 2-3 months ago.
Are you blindly trading a 2025, assuming that you're starting Kirk Cousins? Let's say you're a top 4, top 5 team in your Superflex league. You consider yourself a contender or somewhat of a contender. Are you trading your first round pick for Michael Penix, knowing what's coming up in this quarterback? Well, not totally knowing, but having a general idea that this quarterback class is not going to be containing a Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels type. A guy's always going to emerge. If we have this conversation in 4 months, there's going to be a quarterback we like more than right now. But are you making that move if you have Cousins?
First is a lot. That's a tough pill to swallow. I'm trying to get away with giving 2 seconds. I don't know if I can give a first, and partly the reason being it's so tough. Partly the reason being
the team context changes it up a lot. You know, you're already in. You're already in.
Yeah, the tricky part is if it's a bottom 4 pick or so, that means I'm a contender, and this is such a good running back class, which is the position that you really love to get because they're instant turn and burn type of players for your fantasy teams. Typically, not always, but typically. So I'm gonna say no. I would not give my 25 first at the moment, but I don't feel like had I said yes, I wasn't going to feel good about it. And I don't feel good saying no. Like it's a very fair asking price. And I think that's what you should be expecting. But I don't know what it would be right now. Like I'd be interested to go out there and put out some feelers to see what people are willing to pay for Penix.
Yeah. And on the flip side, if you took Penix because of the structural nature of your rookie draft and you reached a point where I just can't pass him up because this guy is a top 10 pick and I'm picking at like the 201, the 112, the 202, wherever he fell, and there was sort of that level for you. Penix has already gained value. J.J. McCarthy's done for the year. Bo Nix doesn't look good, and Kirk Cousins looks like he's like 45 years old. Can't move. Yeah. So I think that you take what Garrett said. If you're looking to acquire Penix, try to be creative with it. But if you're holding Penix, don't take anything less than first because your window is coming. Let's talk about the other situation, which is maybe a little trickier because Mark Andrews just turned 29. He got double teamed the entire game. Steve Spagnuolo, as always, kind of crushed Mark Andrews. Like several bad performances against Kansas City Chiefs, but we still don't like to see it. It's game 1, and Isaiah Likely looked awesome. He's 24 years old. Isaiah Likely's production last year in the second half of the year was terrific. He had 3 games in a 4-week stretch, like towards the back end of the season, with 18 PPR points or more. Game 1, he looked like the best tight end in football out on the field. Now, he's not going to be the tight end 1, but with the way that they're in 12 personnel, I think that there is a scenario that the scoring between Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely stays pretty similar this year. Do you think that that's a little bit aggressive on my part? Do you think that this is going to be Mark Andrews just separating and the gap, or Do you have concerns about things like the tightrope surgery? And could we see the values converging a little bit this year between these two tight ends?
Yeah, I could definitely see the values converging. I think they're going to get closer and closer. I am still overall Team Andrews. I do think that he will outscore Isaiah Likely, but I think this is one of those unique situations where I don't think we have to be mutually exclusive with these things. Like, could Mark Andrews still be the tight end one on this team and be a great option in fantasy? Yes. Could Isaiah Likely be the tight end two on this team and also still be a great option for fantasy? Yes. Like, you look at this team and this offensive line is piss poor.
It's awful.
I mean, it's not a good line at all. And if things are going to continue the way that they are, they're going to have to use the passing game and Lamar Jackson's legs to get the offensive production that they need. So if that's the case, we're going to see a lot of Lamar Jackson running, sure, but he's going to have to get the ball out quickly. Traditionally, you want some lower ADOT guys, which are normally your tight ends that are going to be doing that, or your slot guys, which is Zay Flowers. That's why we saw a lot of targets to the tight ends, a lot of targets to Zay Flowers. I think that trend is going to continue. So could we have a weird situation where Mark Andrews finishes as tight end 5 on the year and Isaiah Likely finishes as tight end 8 on the year? Like, I think those things could both happen.
I love that. And the dramatic shift to go to 12 personnel, like, I think we need to give a hat tip to Todd Monken because he's dealing with a poor offensive line, but this guy is just like super talented at his job and has looked at his roster, and last year was exclusively in 11. Like, the guy has basically shifted 11 personnel and 12 personnel in a season. Now, will they stay plus 50% in 12 personnel? I don't know. But no team last year had this high of a 12 personnel like for the entire season. But when you look at it, Isaiah Likely is always sort of been a big, slow, nasty route runner, wide receiver who kind of plays tight end. That's what he was at Coastal Carolina. And that, if we'll recall, Garrett, he also had that insane preseason heading into his rookie year where he set all sort of like preseason records. He was the most tight end production in the preseason. So like Isaiah Likely is flashed now in his first preseason, in his rookie year when he got the opportunity, and then last year. And I think they're sort of treating him as their wide receiver too. And those two guys actually mesh quite well with Zay Flowers, who's a de facto wide receiver 1, but he's not really a traditional alpha. So I think this is a situation where I agree with you. I think both of these guys could thrive. I would like to roster Likely if I have Mark Andrews. I think that there's going to be people looking to quote unquote sell high this week that maybe in 6 weeks are going to say, look at all this utility I could have gotten from Isaiah Likely. I don't know if I necessarily sold for enough. So it's definitely a tilting one. But Isaiah Likely is just good at football. The guy is a football player out there, and a guy who's produced for us in fantasy. Can he do it consistently for the year? I don't know, Garrett. That jump cut was so nasty on that touchdown. I can't get this hyped about Isaiah Likely this early in the year, but that jump cut was disgusting. So it was so good. That game in general, like, what a great way to start out the year with that game versus what we had last year at Detroit, Kansas City. That's a whole nother conversation. But before we get you out of here, we want to reveal, we talked in the pre-show, we've got 8 moves we think you can make for your dynasty roster right now. And we're going to rip through those. The first one is, this is the Puka Nacua managers are not going to like to hear this, but we're sort of in lockstep on Puka Nacua as a sell. And for me, it's not necessarily the injury. We don't like seeing knee injuries, of course, but injury was worse than we're led on. This is a guy who had injuries in college. But for me, it's even when he comes back, Puka Nacua is not going to be the wide receiver 1. Cooper Kupp had 21 targets last week. This looks like Cooper Kupp 2022 out there. He looks incredible. So for me, it's like Puka Nacua, if you can find somebody in your league who is treating him like 90% of what he was last year, I'm looking to make that move, Garrett. I'm curious for you. Do you share everything I'm saying here? And then we can talk about a little valuation.
100%. Like Yes, I think he's been look, he had an amazing rookie season, but the odds of that being his high watermark are very, very high. Even before the injury, it felt like it was very, very high. And now, especially with the injury and Cooper Kupp just balling out. So, yes, I would have no problem if there are people that still value him as a top 10 dynasty wide receiver. Like, I'm looking to capitalize on that.
Okay, so let's price check it. Rashee Rice or Puka Nacua in Dynasty?
Rashee
Rice.
I'd probably say Rice.
It
feels wrong, but it's right.
It's right. It's absolutely right. And Rashee Rice, we could have talked about like what a game he had, but let's go a little bit further down. Like Xavier Worthy plus. We could probably get Xavier Worthy plus in this situation. Like how much on top of Xavier Worthy to get you to give up Puka Nacua?
If I got a high end second with Worthy, I think that would be enough. If it was 201, 202, 203, like somewhere in there with Worthy, I would be willing to make that move.
Brian Thomas Jr. plus. Same as Worthy?
I'm a little bit lower on Brian Thomas, despite him like looking fantastic this week. So it would be a little bit more for me with Brian Thomas, but I don't think it's drastically different than Worthy.
I think you can also look to go 2-for-1 with your Puka Nacua. Add a running back, add a wide receiver, go 2-for-1 with Puka. I think that might be the best strategy as well, but we're in lockstep on that one. How about sell Travis Etienne? And this is one where we saw Tank Bigsby. I think we were a year ahead on Tank Bigsby, especially in redraft, where last year he steamed up. We see Tank Bigsby have the same amount of carries and badly outclass Travis Etienne as a runner. Etienne last year, 3.9 yards per carry. This past week, 3.8 yards per carry. Whereas Bigsby is like a 215-pound hard runner who they seem to want to utilize. Now, Etienne's still going to get the targets, but how much is that worth with him? Like, we've added in Brian Thomas. We have a healthy Christian Kirk. We have Evan Ingram. This is going to be a balanced passing game. This is certainly not an Alvin Kamara situation. So for me, I'm looking to kind of kick the tires on moving Travis Etienne because I think that the usage is going to be annoying this year.
I'm 100% with you. And like tying in with this and one that we had coming up a little bit, I'll tie it in now. Like I feel very similar about the Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby situation as I do the Rachaad White, Bucky Irving situation. Like I feel very similar about both of these guys. Here we have two running backs that on the surface were amazing running backs last year, both top 5-6 guys last year in the season-long finish. But both guys were very inefficient. Both guys were very inconsistent. And both guys have talented running backs behind them that are going to make life really annoying. Now, am I saying that Tank Bigsby is going to overtake Travis Etienne? Not necessarily. Am I saying Bucky Irving is going to overtake Rachaad White? Not necessarily. But what it's going to do is it's going to make starting either one of those players really difficult to do. When you look at Tank Bigsby, he could be taking a larger and larger chunk of that running work and relegating him to the passing game. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Pass catching backs still have a lot of value, but it's not the ridiculous workload that we saw in the past. Same thing with Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving comes in here and looks significantly better on the ground than Rachaad White. And he's even a little more dangerous because what was Bucky Irving known for in college? He was one of only 2 running backs last year to have over 50 receptions. So that one's even a little more dangerous that Rachaad White needs to stay healthy because if we get a full game of Bucky Irving, it might not fully go back. So I'm not saying White's dead, but I'm even more concerned about him than I am Etienne. But for both of them, they've moved from like low end RB1s to like flex plays for me at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And we had buy Bucky Irving, and I think that it's team context as well. Like you don't just need to buy Bucky Irving if you have Rachaad White, but if you have Rachaad White, you really need to be trying to buy Bucky Irving. And this is a player where a lot of the managers who drafted him, there wasn't a whole lot of steam in rookie drafts. Like This is a guy where he went in a number of third rounds. It might cost you a future second to get it done, but Bucky Irving looks awesome as a runner, and he's just so shifty and hits the hole exactly where you want to see it. We saw the long run. They're chanting Bucky, Bucky, Bucky in the stadium already. They're not chanting Rashad, Rashad, Rashad. The one thing Rachaad White has going for him, though, he is, by all accounts, a very solid receiver.
Yep,
inefficient as a runner, though. And at the end of the day, it's much easier to use Bucky Irving as much as he can handle as a runner. And you nailed it, though, Garrett. Any week that Rachaad White misses, you would see Bucky Irving with his receiving skills. Whatever Rachaad White gets as a receiver, Bucky Irving can do just as much. The guy was super talented at Oregon, meshed completely well with Bo Nix. So we're in lockstep with those three. I had it next as a buy low on Chris Olave. Where are you at on this one? Do you agree with me on this one? For me, it's they scored they scored every time they get up the ball. They had like 47 points, but it wasn't like a high volume pass situation. They hit Rashid Shaheed on the deep pass to start the game. And this was just such a weird game with how much better they were than Carolina. I think we could see a Chris Olave bounce back week as early as this week against Dallas. Where are you at on him?
I'll be honest. This one I don't have a strong opinion either way on. I'm not overly convinced that Chris Olave is an elite type receiver. I think he is more suited to be a number 2, but it's a team that needs him to be a number 1. And because of that, there'll be decent volume at times, but he's a guy that seems to always be a little bit dinged up, a little bit banged up, isn't a physical and physically imposing player, doesn't play with the dog like we like to talk about. So while I think he is going to be a very effective fantasy football receiver for a long time, I just don't know that we'll get crazy high production. So if you're buying now because the price is dipped, I have no issue with that, but I'm not ready to be a stan necessarily for Chris Olave.
Yeah, I think to me, I am buying because of the dip. Last week was you have a new offensive coordinator and the guy gets 2 targets, 2 catches, but he has 5.5 yards per reception. But this is a guy that down the stretch last year continually gave us usable fantasy weeks. I mean, we've seen it with Olave. I do agree with you that he's never going to sort of equal the steam where we had these early in his rookie year where we thought maybe Chris Olave could challenge to be a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. He's certainly not that, but I do think he's a locked in top 15 dynasty wide receiver. And I have some confidence in this Kubiak offense. I think it's going to be a well-run team, and just the quality of the weapons around him, his profile as a player, and what we've seen in the past, I'm going to kick the tires on that one. But like you said, this is not one where I'm paying Amon-Ra St. Brown type prices. This is a player where I want to acquire him like he's wide receiver 15, wide receiver 16, not like he's wide receiver 5 or 6, because he just isn't that. But one wide receiver that we're on as a buy low candidate that all of the metrics are supporting this, the Adonai Mitchell is on the field, and the way that Anthony Richardson looked with his ability to push the ball downfield and Adonai Mitchell's ability to separate and get behind defenses, it just feels like we're going to get an Adonai Mitchell game where the final stat line is similar to Alec Pierce. Do you agree with that one?
100%. To me, if they were supremely confident in what they had in Alec Pierce, and this is no knock on Pierce, I don't think he's a bad player by any stretch of the imagination, but they just signed Michael Pittman Jr. to a new deal. Why would you draft him? Why draft him if he's not going to be your Z type of guy? So I think long-term, this is more of the Adonai Mitchell role, more so than the Alec Pierce role. And Adonai Mitchell had 2 similar opportunities. They were just Anthony Richardson has a cannon and he overthrew him. But there were opportunities for the same type of plays there. They just didn't fully come together. But I have a good amount of Adonai Mitchell in best ball, and I'm really excited because I do think we are going to have a few 4 receptions for 125 yards and 2 touchdown games. Like, those days are coming for Adonai Mitchell. In his rookie year, he's going to be frustrating week to week, and you're not going to be able to confidently put him in your lineup just yet. But long term, like, there are going to be some amazing weeks between these two players.
Yeah, and another player where we're sort of both in lockstep is buying Trey Benson. Trey Benson, like James Conner, had scored 20 PPR points. Looked really, really good this past weekend. But James Conner has played 13 games, 13 games, 15 games, 13 games, 10 games, 13 games, 12 games. I don't see a full season in that. And we're talking about an older back. Benson, 3 rush attempts, 1 catch this past weekend. But as a contingent play in this offense, you got to like your opportunity to buy low on Benson.
Absolutely. The propensity of this team too to give their main back like almost all of the work is really encouraging to me. I know, like, you're like, well, don't we want to see 8 to 10 touches out of Benson right now? Sure, like that would be awesome. But what this tells me is later on when Benson is the guy, because whether it's by injury from James Cook or by just time running out, him getting older and Benson being the guy, like, they are going to give him the workload. And so when that day comes, man, it's going to be incredible. James Conner, surprisingly, actually one of the top running back last year in breakaway runs. So that's runs over 20 yards. And it's James Conner. Like, we're not talking about an elite athlete necessarily. We're talking about a big physical bruising back. Trey Benson, we saw that speed at the combine. Like, if there are big explosive plays to be had in this offense for James Conner, there's absolutely big explosive plays to be had for Trey Benson. So this is definitely more of a long-term outlook, but when the day comes, I think Trey Benson's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I do as well. And it's again, this is when you want to try to buy, because the manager who drafted him used a pretty high rookie pick. And this is an opportunity for you to kick the tires and see if that frustration creates a window for you. I'll keep the next one very short because we're both in lockstep on trying to acquire Trey McBride. If there's anybody in your leagues who's a little bit frustrated with Trey McBride and thinks, hey, maybe I should have sold last year, it's not the case. 29% target share this past week, had 19 slot snaps, 9 targets. The smash game's coming for Trey McBride. But I want to let you close out with this one. Our final recommendation, this is a Garret Price special. Why don't you talk about your guy, J.K. Dobbins?
Yeah, this is I'm going full contrarian mode here, because I know the narrative is, hey, here's a back, had a boom game week 1, very often injured. You move those type of guys. And look, I get it. I totally understand it. And I don't blame you. Making a profit on a guy that you drafted real late this past year, never a bad idea. So I'm not going to hate anybody for moving on from him. But if you're a contending team, like, you need points. You need points. And when you look at this offense is very friendly to running backs. Just in 10 attempts, we saw what J.K. Dobbins did. And I'll have people saying, like, yeah, but did you see the runs? Yeah, I saw the runs. I get it. He's not a blazer. He's not, running 23 miles an hour down the field. I get that. But if he does tend to get healthier, those runs get even longer. And honestly, I don't care about top end speed that much at my running back position. I care about vision. I care about agility. I care about opportunity. Like, those are the things I care about. And that's what he has here. Yes, Gus Edwards isn't fully going away. He's going to be involved. But I think the last piece of the puzzle that isn't being talked about nearly enough is what Greg Roman said about J.K. Dobbins as a passing game weapon. He talked about him in the offseason as a passing game weapon, did get 3 catches on, I believe it was 4 targets this past weekend. So they were targeting him. But let's remember what Austin Eckler did with Justin Herbert. If, in fact, J.K. Dobbins is the passing down back, there are even better days to be had in the passing game. So I think for right now, I'm seeing a lot of J.K. Dobbins for roughly a second. As a contender, I'm doing that deal all day.
Yeah, I love the conviction on that one, and certainly the contrarian nature of your take is gonna really go a long way, because it's sort of paint by numbers this week. If you turn on any generic Dynasty podcast, not my podcast and Garrett's podcast, you're going to see sell J.K. Dobbins as like the obvious one. Guy's got injury history. But at the end of the day, this coaching staff, I think, would love to get a lot out of J.K. Dobbins. I think they're trying to establish a culture, a toughness culture there. The offensive line looks awesome. I mean, the Joe Alt looks incredible. He totally manhandled Max Crosby this past weekend. You didn't hear Max Crosby's name called once if you watch that game. And I think at the end of the day, they're going to lean on Dobbins for as much as you can. And Garrett, at the end of the day, if you get 9 starts out of J.K. Dobbins for a second-round pick, and he's delivering you top 15 production, and he helps you win a Dynasty title, end of the day, you're paying that price. It's a little bit like, Theo, I don't want that short-term or window. Most running back starts right now in Dynasty are short-term windows, and they're going to ride J.K. Dobbins as much as you can get. I'll say this, if you want to buy J.K. Dobbins, do it before this Sunday. They're playing the Carolina Panthers. He's going to go nuts again. And if you're selling J.K. Dobbins and you disagree with us, then make sure you hold him through this Carolina game because it's going to be another really big performance. Speaking about big performances, Garrett, you crushed it. Let everybody know where they can find your work.
Yeah. You can find me over at Dynasty Nerds and dynastynerds.com, on Twitter at Dynasty Price. All of my stuff is in the Nerds family. So yeah, lots of good stuff coming out every single week. We have more shows, more YouTube content than we've ever had before. So make sure you subscribe.
Yeah, and stick with us here at Dynasty Life. We're going to drop shows like this about every week. Some weeks we're going to go every 2 weeks, but we're going to drop shows like this. We're going to give you all the Dynasty advice you need to crush your leagues this season.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.